Is everyone ready? I'll just have to assume that you are. Well, greetings, assembled people, creatures, and beings of Othercon. Welcome. As you likely know, this is a panel about living as a fictive and forming an identity around, or perhaps despite, that. I welcome anyone to listen, however, as Othercon is a place to not only learn about yourself, but to learn about others and to interact with the community. Regardless, I ask that you hold your questions until the end, at which point there will be a dedicated section of time for them. I cannot answer questions effectively during the panel, as I am both easily distracted and long winded, which is a recipe for going overtime and off script. A note on terminology before we begin. I am aware that there are multiple words that mean the same or similar things to the word fictive. For simplicity's sake, I will just be saying fictive for the duration of this panel, as that is my lived experience and the word I feel most comfortable using. Additionally, I may refer to other members of a system as headmates. Again, I am aware that there are many words for this, but I will generally use this one as it is fairly widespread and I use it for my own system. If during the Q&A you have a different word you would rather I use for your system members when referring to them, you need only ask. I will adjust my language accordingly. For now, however, headmate is the word I will be moving forward with. All that aside, welcome. A brief introduction. My name is Goratrix. I am a vampire, a fictive from the tabletop role-playing game Vampire the Masquerade. I am one of many canon characters pre-created for game masters to use in the games they run for their players as they see fit, with some pre-written lore to help establish both the character and the setting. When it comes to this world, I have been here since August of 2021, coming into existence during OtherCon itself, in the midst of a panel that convinced my system that it would not be so bad to have me around. Thank you very much to Pale, who ran that panel. Last year, during OtherCon 2022, I ran a panel about living with having a problematic, quote unquote, fiction based identity. The script and recording for that are both available for your perusal if you would like. And finally, if you are wondering, yes, I always talk like this. You will get used to it. Now, the topic at hand. Being a fictive can be a confusing and lonely thing. We have much in common with fiction kind, but there is a crucial difference. While someone who is fiction kind has an identity and life outside of that fiction based identity, in the very beginning, fictives typically do not. For most of us, the experience is rather like being plucked from your life and placed on the head of someone else. In my case, an at the time college student, with no understanding or awareness of where you are, what is going on, why, or the worst question of all, what you are supposed to do now. Take a breath, let it out slowly. We will figure this out together. It is a journey, yes, but it is uniquely yours. And the advantage to that is that it's quite difficult to get wrong. In short, my recommendation is this. Understand yourself in the context of either canon or canon divergent normata. Grow as comfortable as you can with that, and then expand outwards. Find or forge new aspects to your identity. Find new interests and hobbies. Participate in things you never would or could have back in source. Engagement with the outside world is key to not feeling lost. If you lock yourself up in the identity that has been handed to you, if you insist upon remaining stagnant as you were when you formed, you are, more often than not, setting yourself up to be miserable. This is not an accusation. I and many of my headmates attempted the same thing, and only began to enjoy ourselves once we started reaching out and opening it up to the world and people around us. It's infuriating to realize that it works, but it really does. It is, ultimately, your choice whether or not you want to grow beyond what has been set out for you. beyond what you are and were back in Source. The rest of this panel will be moving forward with the assumption that you are choosing to do so, or at least that you are willing to listen to how that might be done while considering it yourself. Personally, I do not see much harm in personal growth and development, even if it is, quote unquote, out of character, or outside the bounds of what others would consider to be canon you. You are wholly fictional no longer, and should not let the bounds of fiction confine you. Do not let yourself be trapped by others' expectations of you. If they want to interact with a wholly canon compliant version of you, they should try role playing. You owe no one any part of your identity, and anyone who tries to box you in should be ashamed. By all means, use canon or your noemata, your memories, as an anchor if you so desire. Many fictives find this comforting. It is your point of origination, your source, where you are from. It is perfectly reasonable that you would want to keep that as a core part of you. I am not suggesting casting off canon unless that is what you want to do, and that is your choice. If you choose to do so, I would advise doing so slowly, in pace with you picking up other aspects of your identity if you feel yourself lacking, for fear of leaving yourself so empty that you do not know what to latch onto. Once again, however, that is your choice. I trust that you will do what you think is best. Now, identity building when you have found yourself in a strange world, sharing a head with strange people, can be quite difficult, especially if you have no aspects of identity outside of your source. I have talked about why you might want to grow beyond that, become something else or more. We now reach the how. This is a 3-step process, and the first step I have labeled in context. Older and more established fictives may be able to skip this step, as chances are you have been doing it already. Many newer fictives also embark on this part of the journey, but not all, so I will walk you through it. The first step of broadening your identity, unless you are choosing to cast off your source completely and immediately, is to do so in context of your source, whether that be canon or your version of it. Doing this will help you flesh yourself out if you feel it is needed. Ask anyone with a fiction based identity, and most will tell you that engaging with source is an excellent way to connect to the identity. You may remember pieces of your history, things you like, skills you had, or may even still have. There's a wealth of identity to be drawn from your source if you go digging. This may not work for everyone, but it does for many, so I believe it is usually worth a shot. At the very least, doing this digging and engaging with your source lets you get used to the idea and process of identity broadening and exploration in a safer, more comfortable way. Your source generally will feel less like a frontier and more like dipping your toes back into the pool. My first recommendation for this is just to engage with your source. Watch it, read it, play it, whatever lets you interact. Most of all, I recommend writing about it. Anything you remember directly, any noemata you have, even things you just know without a direct memory. Write out your feelings on it, the people in it, the things you did, and the events you witnessed. Writing helps you work through your feelings on a topic in a way that lets you reference them again later. Maybe you turn it into a post for your blog or website. Maybe it becomes an essay. Maybe it is simply a journal entry for you and you alone. Whatever you decide, I highly encourage that you engage with, or at least think about, your source and write about it. Personally, I worked out many of my apparent contradictions and issues with myself by simply going, step by step, through the things that bothered me. My early writings on the fiction kind to dream with detail the atrocities I committed in source and why, what on earth my reasoning was. If I had not done this, I do not know if I ever would have reconciled what I was supposed to be with who I was, and who I had to become to live with myself once I had exited the context of the harsh and cruel world I came from. Take your time with this. Do not rush. You are not in a race. The time will pass regardless, so you might as well let it pass pleasantly and with little pressure. My next recommendation is to seek out Noemata in general, and God, I hope I am pronouncing that correctly. If I am not, do not correct me, let me live in my lie. For those unfamiliar with the word, Noemata, singular Noema, describes any kind of source memory you may have, whether that be a specific moment, a scene, a smell, a sense, or just knowing a fact without any moments or instances to back it up. The two best ways to do this that I know of are to engage with Canon, to prompt your mind to remember what it sees, although this can produce false memories, or to do as many, usually mundane, things as you can in the hopes that you will trip a memory trigger. Neither method is perfect, and there are other tips for getting and finding Noemata out there. If anyone listening has resources for that, please feel free to link them in the chat. Finally, this may be controversial, I would recommend reaching out to and talking to source mates, whether or not they share your exact canon. I know many fictives are not comfortable with source mates, never mind doubles, but if you are, I cannot stress enough how much better you can feel after talking to them if you get along. I do not know where I would be today without my boyfriend Chai and the treehouse system. In our shared days of early days of being fictives, that summer and autumn of 2021, we were lost and untethered, and latched onto each other in an attempt to anchor ourselves. We are much stronger for having had each other, and are extremely close, and I do not see that ever fading. Chaya helped me work through my issues with my identity, smooth out the wrinkles, and accept who I am over who I should be, and vice versa. Without Chaya, I doubt I ever would have engaged with the Alter Human community directly, so my thanks goes out to him. Without him, this panel would not exist. Source mates are extremely helpful because they understand. Many of them know the context of the world, so you do not have to provide it. They know what happened, who everyone is. They understand why you may feel the way you do about things, why topics might be complicated, etc. They are less likely to have to ask basic questions, and together you may discover things about yourselves and each other. Doubles, fictives of the same character, are even more understanding in many ways, although I understand the possible distress of meeting one. I never have, I doubt I ever will. My friends and I are not terribly popular characters in the grand scheme of Vampire the Masquerade or the broader world of darkness. But my head and source mate Sasha Vikos has. Their double is also in the treehouse system and goes by the name Ashna, separating herself somewhat from the name of Sasha Vikos, but still, she and Sasha are the same in many ways. They understand each other implicitly, often without ever having to say anything on a topic other than to bring it up, and they understand. There's a level of identity diving and forming that can be reached only by someone who understands you wholly and completely, and a similar double is a good resource for that, if you can find one and if you are comfortable with it. If you cannot or are not, that's fine. It is by no means a requirement, simply a recommendation. Step 2, Things to do. Beyond engaging with your source material, to expand your identity, you will need to engage in other activities. Form an interest in something. Get a hobby. Give yourself some enrichment, or in a more joking manner, roll a pumpkin full of meat around your enclosure. Now, while meat pumpkins may be an appropriate form of engagement for some more inhuman fictives, for the rest of us, we would get bored quite quickly and need to find other activities to occupy us. Why do activities? Why have an interest? Well, as a living, at least at the moment, and thinking creature, you need something to think about. And thinking about yourself and your source will only last you so long. Eventually, the thoughts will become mundane and well tread to you, and to maintain a level of activity and happiness, you will need something to engage your mind, and that thing is typically going to be something you enjoy, often an activity. The idea is to give you something that you want to front or co-front, to do or be present for, so that you are around in order to experience the world, form likes and dislikes, and grow as a person. This is the next step, and you can take it as quickly or as slowly as you'd like. Expose yourself to activities, shows, songs, anything you'd like at a speed that is comfortable to you. A good starting point is to go along with what a headmate is doing and try to get into their interests. And if it doesn't work out, that's fine. There is no harm in trying something only to decide that it is not for you. A headmate's activity or interest is fairly safe since, chances are, the system is going to be doing that regardless, and all you are spending is your own engagement time, which you wanted to be doing anyway. Another good starting point is anything that you were interested in back in source, especially if it still speaks to you. If you liked to read novels, listen to a type of music, create a certain kind of art, that might still be a good outlet for you, and you may still enjoy it. You might not. Key to this is remembering that it is okay if you don't still like something. People grow and change over time, and not all interests last forever. Perhaps they will return in the future. When it comes to skills you used to have, however, beware. Many fictives lose their skills in the transfer over to the system and need to redevelop them, and therefore engaging with an old skill-based interest may be incredibly frustrating, especially at first, as you may be back at beginner level despite knowing that you used to be better. I've had this experience with many of my own skills, particularly language learning. Be kind to yourself, and remind yourself that, physically, you have a different brain than you once did, if you had one at all. Robots or spirits may have had some other analog, and it may not know how to do what your old one did. You will need to teach it anew, and for some, that is a worthwhile endeavor, and for others, it is too painful and frustrating. Do what feels best to you, not what stresses you out. On the flip side of that, do not limit yourself to hobbies or interests that match or make sense for who your source set you out to be. If something intrigues you, take a look. Pick it up. Give it a try. There is no right and wrong when it comes to things you like or enjoy. If you like it, you like it. Do not let what others might think of you or your image get in the way of enjoying something genuinely. This is for you, no one else. That being said, I encourage you to seek out community, make friends, find more reasons to front and to care about the world you have found yourself in. Perhaps it is similar to the one you came from, or perhaps it is very different. But you are here now, and I highly recommend that you try to make the most of it. I have found that friends, even just a few, make everything worth it, and that they make my darker days much easier to bear, as well as making my better days even more enjoyable than they already were. As for you, non-human fictives, do not fear, I have not forgotten you. While you can pick up the same interests and hobbies as your human and human-adjacent headmates just fine in many cases, activities not suited to your species might not interest you. My recommendation is to look for alterhuman lists and guides of suggested activities for your species or a similar one. The Otherkin and Therian communities are extremely good at this, and just posting in a community asking for suggestions is likely to get you quite a few. And if all else fails, go back to square one. Meet Pumpkin. Now, I must confess that my recommendations for activities and engaging in yourself and the world around you focus almost entirely on fronting or co-fronting and engaging with the outside world. Some systems, I know, have very detailed and rich inner worlds, where headmates can perform tasks, do activities, and otherwise lead complete, complex, and fulfilling lives. If this can substitute for you and make you feel fulfilled, I see no reason to limit yourself to engaging strictly with the world outside of your own mind. But I am not knowledgeable on this topic, as my own system's inner world is rudimentary at best. A simulation designed to let us visualize our existence, rather than an actual complex and detailed place. When it comes to this, I will have to leave it in the hands of systems who experience it. Now, on to step 3, becoming. This is the most challenging step by far, and for many it is not necessary. Perhaps you find yourself happy with your identity. Perhaps you are not perfect, but no one is. And you just want to continue to live your life, experience the world, and grow and change as you will, letting yourself be shaped by your experiences like most people do. Fantastic. That is my recommended approach in most cases, and I encourage you to continue on that path. Keep experiencing, keep growing, keep talking with people, picking up interests, doing activities, and making things. Write, love, live, and have fun. But for some, particularly those with more quote unquote problematic source material, that may not be enough. In some cases, a fictive, usually of a villain, will form, and either immediately or eventually realize that they do not want to be who they are. They do not want to keep these personality traits, they cannot stand the things they have done. Or perhaps they are simply sick of it and wish to change themselves. For those of you in this camp, first, my condolences. I have been in and out of this mindset, and have several headmates that exist within it. This is a long, difficult process, and as frustrating and counterproductive as it is to hear, you cannot get through this if the core of your being is self-hatred. You must be willing to accept or forgive yourself for being that way, or for doing what you did. You must be willing to accept that there is no going back now, only moving forward, and accept that you can only change the future, not the past. However, also remember that you do not owe anyone anything. Do not let anyone tell you that what you must change. You do not have to stop. You do not have to change anything, although I would advise keeping behavior most would consider repulsive to yourself, or system accountability, if nothing else. You are not obligated to change the quote unquote bad parts of yourself. If you wish to, that should be your decision, and you should do it because you want to. Never change because someone is pressuring you. Never. That is a lesson I had to learn the hard way, primarily back in Source. And if you listen to nothing else I say today, listen when I tell you that bowing to those who pressure you to change who you are leads only to strife. 1,000 years I suffered from that. Do not make my mistake. Learn from me. Now, let us say you want to change something about yourself in this way. A key trait, a streak of cruelty, something along those lines. How? You will hate it, but refer back to step 2. Engage with the world around you. Make friends. Care about people. Let yourself love and be loved, and do not stop people when they try to care about you. Let the running waters of time and the world smooth out your rough points, wear away your sharp edges. Time will let you become who you want to be if you allow it. Think about this, too, if you want to do something about it. Think about what you would rather be like. Who around you has those traits? How do they act when they show them? What do they do that you admire so much that you want to be that way, either instead or in addition to the way that you are? You may have heard the phrase, fake it until you make it before, but in this case, it is very true. Identity is a fluid thing sometimes, although I admit that I find it more fluid than most due to my borderline personality disorder. You could fool yourself into really being a way without actually being that way. Or, at the very least, you will find your mimicry becoming easier and easier, more comfortable. And if it is something you like, then fantastic. You have succeeded. How you act is what matters, not the way you behave. It's a minor difference, I know. Remember that changing yourself must be an act of self-love, not of self-hatred. You must want to be a new way because you would like it better, not because you despise yourself so much that you cannot face yourself in the mirror. You can take your dislike of itself and turn it around into something positive. but you cannot self-punish your way into being a different person. Not successfully, not happily. And again, remember, you are not obligated to change any part of yourself, even if you are problematic or even a bad person. There are many bad personality traits of mine that I do not seek to change, because I have accepted and come to terms with them. To change them would be to cease to be the person I am and am comfortable being. There is no reason to change who I am intentionally and directly. I will let the world and my experiences affect me as they will, but that is no different than how most people live their lives. If you choose this path of changing yourself, make sure it is because you want to, not because you feel you have to. Putting it all together. All of this advice is nice, but does it work? I like to think so. This reflects my own journey and approach to growth and engagement with the world, as well as that of several of my headmates. Those of you who read my older work or knew me when I first entered the community have likely noticed a significant change in me from my first days. I am less abrasive, less angry, less likely to lash out or snarl at the first hint of provocation. I was a desperate, scared creature, a beast cornered and threatened. Now, I know the world and the community well enough to step up and give a panel, write essays, run a dream with community. And that was because I let myself learn and grow from my experiences. I let myself pick up interests and make my own friends outside of the system's pre existing friends. And I worked on becoming someone more stable, someone I liked. I have lived much of my life in self loathing, and it is a strange, wonderful feeling to be free of its mire, at least for now. For another example, my headmate Japheth was fairly distant for 2 or so years until very recently stepping forward and making friends and engaging with his own interests. It took him some time to write a few angry, lost essays, answer a few prompts, and then stew, and only emerge slowly, piece by piece, as we slowly convinced him to care about other people and the world around us. Only once he began to take an interest in what the system as a whole was up to did we finally see him smile and begin to have fun. And it was worth all of the time it took him to get there, because it was such an improvement over his deep, vast melancholy that he came to us with. For our system, our main methods of engagement with the world are through making friends, often with fictives and other systems, but not always, and through playing video games. Our game library is vast. Different headmates play different games, and even when they share interest in the game, many have different characters or save files from each other. This helps us feel different and like we are making our own progress, giving us a reason to front and care about something that is uniquely ours. This is what works for us, but maybe it doesn't for you. That's fine. For 1,000 systems, there are 2,500 ways of making progress. The goal of this entire process is to help you be happy. The goal is to let you enjoy the life you find yourself in, to be happy with yourself and the situation you are in. If this guide helps you get there, fantastic. If not, but you get there another way, good. What matters is that you one day sit back and realize that you enjoy who you are, where you are, and what you are doing. Adjusting is not always easy, but with time, effort, and support, I know that each and every one of you can do it. Take a breath for me, once more. Tell yourself, please, that you can do this. It is only insurmountable so long as you allow it to loom over you. By breaking it into smaller chunks and individual steps, you can take it one manageable piece at a time until you realize that you have reached a state of contentment. One day, you will get there. Now, as the lecture part of this panel draws to a close and we approach the Q&A, I have a couple of notes. First, if you have a question that not get answered or that you would prefer to discuss privately, you can message me here on Discord, on Tumblr, or even through email at any time. Just specify that you are looking to talk to Goratrix, and I will be there to get back to you. Second, I would like to open the discussion and Q&A portion with a list of audience-gathered suggestions. What would you recommend to a new or struggling fictive? What activities, interests, shows, games, community spaces? We have extremely varied experiences, I'm sure. So drop your suggestions in chat for people to read through. If you have anything for your or a similar source, feel free to suggest that as well. While that happens, and while people read through those, let us open up the remaining time for questions. I will do my best to answer. Please put your questions into the panel questions chat. I will read them out and attempt to answer them, or open them up to the floor. If I get your name wrong, if I pronounce it incorrectly, I apologize in advance. I will do my best. I'm very sorry. If you put questions in the main chat, I will not see them, more likely than not. Oh, Discord, don't freeze on me now. All right. Getting started on the questions. Melody asks, do you need a past life or memories to be valid? No, you don't. You absolutely do not need to remember anything. You do not need a past life. Absolutely not. If you have the identity, you have the identity. Melody also asks, what do you do when no one seems to care or want your fictive around? Forgive me if I sound flippant, but I think my suggestion is to make better friends. You will find someone who will listen to you, who will care. Reach out, keep looking. You will find someone that you will want to talk to that will want to talk to you in turn. It may just take some time. Roxley asks, how would you suggest on finding doubles or source mates from your source? That's a difficult one. I have not yet found source mates outside of systems we already knew. I would recommend going into community spaces and posting, saying you're looking for people like yourself. Be loud and open with who you are and what your source and your identity is. If there are others looking, they will find you. I would not recommend going into fandom spaces for that source and looking for others, however. That can be difficult. And Feng asks the same question just about. Oh, Mac asks a question very difficult. How am I meant to move on from missing loved ones in the life I built up in my source? That is a struggle I think most fictives go through. I would recommend either seeking out people who understand, or at the very least, how do I put this? Acknowledge to yourself that the way you feel is genuine. I know a lot of fictives feel like they're mourning people that don't exist, but they do. To you, at least. My best recommendation is to let yourself feel what you're going to feel and go through grief coping mechanisms, genuine grief, looking up ways that people can deal with losing loved ones, and trying to build something anew. It feels impossible sometimes. It's very difficult, but it's something that helps. I promise. Alina, I believe that said, asks, what if your species is owned by a company with a tight grip that sues anything related to it? How do you resolve it? Oh, I am not a legal expert. I don't know, but I will say I think most identity writings and things you put in community spaces are not going to be copyright violations. I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue, but I must admit I don't know much about that topic. I'm sorry. Noelle asks, how would you suggest finding closure for atrocities committed and loved ones lost? It's hard to make peace with the past when you can't physically interact with the folks and world you knew and potentially hurt. That is a difficult one. I hate to say it, but I wrote about it. Everything with me comes back to writing. You have to let yourself feel the way you're going to feel, and you need to rationalize it. You need to walk yourself through your thought processes, why you did what you did, why you felt it was justified. Let me bring up my theory of morality from the last panel I ran. It is my feeling that most morality is prioritization. And at the time, I don't know the details, but you or whoever may have felt you were doing the right or at least necessary thing. Very few people or beings do things that they believe is wrong for reasons that they believe are the wrong reasons. People tend to do the wrong thing for the right reasons, or the right thing for the wrong reasons, or right in both cases. Generally, there was a reason, and you need to be able to walk through that. It takes a long time. It took me a very long time. Sarabi, I believe is how that's said, says, as someone who's a Therian, I'm not too familiar with fictive, so how does someone come to awaken, so to speak, to their source? What is it like to awaken and realize your identity? I must admit, our system does not have a lot of answer for that because we are aware we have someone new, but they don't tend to talk until we know who they are. We have never had an instance of someone appearing and not knowing who they are. So I'm sorry we can't answer that, but I'm sure someone in the audience can. Let's see. I think something. Turtle, what you said is very long, and I'm sorry. I don't know what your question is. Oh, I scrolled down. What do you do? Oh, God. For you, oh dear. That is, I think, a little bit outside the scope of my knowledge. Oh. My recommendation is going to be the same as most of my recommendations for things you're feeling is to sit down with yourself, let yourself feel it, write or talk it out. Just feel it, go through it, and try to learn to let it hurt less. I'm sorry, that's difficult. Fenris asks, with myself, I vehemently tend to avoid my source. The same has happened with many of my fictive headmates. Almost like we became frightened of what we might discover, or that we will miss people even more. What do you think causes this, and does it stunt our self development? Well, I suppose there's a couple of views here, one of which is if you have a very difficult, frightening, or traumatic source, I think that's a very reasonable thing to want to avoid. You're worried about what you might find out. You're scared of exotrauma, for example, which is never pleasant. The alternative is that it's something that you might be afraid of, but you don't have a clue why. It's your choice whether or not you want to go digging. I think you do not need to worry about it stunting your self development as long as you are engaging elsewhere. You have other things that matter to you instead of just the pieces of source that you have while avoiding the rest. Again, like I said, engaging with source is an optional part of this process. It's not necessary. Blurry Front that doesn't want to say exactly who they are asks, do you think not letting people tell you to change yourself applies to being effective? I feel problematic for being effective, at least being out as myself in less private spaces. It's not a stupid question. That does still apply. Don't let people tell you to change. You are what you are. If people have a problem with it, they don't have to deal with you. They don't have to interact with you. They can mind their own business. Val asks, do you have any tips for source mates talking to people outside of the system for the first time? My headmate hasn't talked to anyone outside yet, and we've been wondering on where to start. My recommendation for first talking to someone outside of the system is to talk to a friend of the system who already knows that you are plural and get them used to talking before reaching out to anyone who may be a source mate. Get used to the experience and then reach out from there. If you don't have anyone who is familiar with you being a system, I would recommend doing so in a community space, like OtherCon. It's a good, safe area to do so because no one's going to get too judgy. Katra asks, how do you interact with the world and make friends when the world seems determined to hate you? Especially in cases like mine, whenever someone meets me, they start being an asshole to the entirety of the Calico constellation. I don't want to cause my family trouble, so I've given up on the outside world. And for King, you deal when everyone surrounding him stereotypes and demoralizes him? When most of what you want to do isn't accessible to him? Well, unfortunately, my biggest recommendation is to block everyone who is mean to you. If you don't like the way someone treats you, don't interact with them. And just narrow down the people you interact with to, if necessary, a thin band and expand outward from there. I have found solace in small groups rather than large ones. And for the record, I'm sorry. I haven't had to deal with many people stereotyping me from the get go. With questions like this and where they're very specific, I would love to answer them and I wish I had more for you. If you want to talk more about my answers to some of these questions, or you feel I didn't give you enough, or I don't have enough information to give you a solid answer, please feel free to PM me once the panel is over. I would be delighted to help. All right, let's see. Vidquibiol asks, I'm curious how it is / feels to borrow what seems to be most the traits of fictional characters that is not created. Being dragonkin, I have very much connection to myself because this draconity encompasses my identity and spirituality, and because it is a part of me I've created. But let's see, let's how it feels to borrow. I'm I'm sorry, I'm not understanding the question. Oh, I get very overwhelmed during the Q&As. I see I have 30 more messages. I'm so sorry. If you could rephrase your question, I'll get to it when I get down there. Cronus asks, how do you cope/deal with frequently seeing your source self on DNI lists and similar? First of all, I'm so sorry. Second of all, I don't know where you're going, where people are uh, putting your identity on DNI lists, but I would honestly say that spaces like that are probably not friendly. There could be exceptions, but generally, if someone's discriminating against you for your identity, that's. Ugh. Just tell yourself that there is nothing wrong with being yourself. There is nothing wrong with you. There is no need for them to be treating you that way. All right, let's see. Luce, I believe that's how your name is said. I hadn't seen it written before. Uh, it says, I don't know if anyone will be able to answer this since my situation, so if you can't, no worries. I'm a fictive who became a fictive despite already having existed in this body for a very long time. How do I cope with that dual identity? Again, I would just work through it as you would essentially as a new fictive, but also I would honestly also approach fictionkin spaces. I know it's a different experience, but trying to merge your current identity and other current identity can be complicated. I think there's a panel about something similar to this. Maybe that would help. I don't know. Let me see. V asks a question that is very long, and I'm not going to read all of it out loud, but essentially, is there any way to encourage other parts to seek out their own personal self-fulfillment while discouraging them from becoming attached to the person that I have become? I would look at interests, things that you yourself are not interested in, and trying to see if any of them find any of that interesting. Something you don't care about, but you think they might be intrigued by, and just trying things out, thing after thing, and don't be ashamed if you try something and it's not for any of you. Rick asks, what does one do when your source is different from your canon, and in the source you did really bad things, but in your canon you didn't as much, but everyone associates you with your source to the point where you want to completely disconnect yourself from it? Should I disconnect from it? This is an unhelpful answer, but it is your choice. I think that you should be able to note who you are and note that you are extremely canon divergent and that you didn't do those things. And if people don't believe you, then that sounds like a them problem. My personal philosophy, which was brought up last year at last year's other con during my panel, was if someone is unkind to you because of your identity, if they don't like the thing you are, if they're not going to listen to you, fuck them. Who cares what they think? There are many people in the world. You don't need to listen to those ones. Astra asks, how do you deal with individuals calling your source a game, movie, TV show, etc.? For some of us, it feels very jarring and off. Uh, I have no idea. I'm sorry, none of us have ever experienced that. In the chat, does anyone have suggestions for that one? Question. See. Azure asks, do you have any specific suggestions or resources for questioning median/mid continuum systems? especially regarding potential fictives navigating that gray area. I don't. I'm sorry. We're not a median system. One of our subsystems is median, but ugh, he's complicated and doesn't talk much, so we don't really know a whole lot about him. If anyone has a resource for that, if you could drop that in the chat, that'd be greatly appreciated. Let's see. Delta says, I'm fictive of a specific source, but early on in my existence, the source I was based on was completely rewritten to the point where it's basically unrecognizable, and in some cases the only similarities are reused names. I still resonate more with the original source, but the only options for indulging in it now entirely revolve around the new canon. What advice would you have for someone in this situation, stuck between what feels right in my old source and what I can actually interact with in the new source? I would recommend engaging with it in a way that does not engage with it. How do I put this? Instead of interacting with it directly, you might be better off writing or talking about it or something of that nature. I don't know what your source is, what format it is. I don't. Hmm. I'm trying to figure out what would be completely rewritten in such that you don't have access to the old version. So if you have the old version, interact with that, and if you don't, I have no idea. I'm sorry. Ah, I'm back. Whew. Thank you, whoever put me back on the stage. I fell off. I fell into the audience. Oh god. Oh no. I lost my place. My entire Discord fell off. Ugh. Let's see. Okay. Whew. What other questions were there? People keep talking in the questions channel, so if there were more questions, I don't see them. So you have 5 minutes. If you have any questions, please toss them in. It looks like everything else was just chatting. I think my Discord crashed in the middle of me apologizing for not having answers to everything. My infuriating habit of not knowing everything. Oh, thank you all for looking for questions. Eridan says, I've always felt weird for being very different from my source. I'm only my source on a very surface level, and I feel that any source mates I do find always expect me to act a certain way. Sometimes they react weirdly when I don't act like they expect me to. Any advice? I have 2 points of advice for you, one of which is to keep looking for ones who are not going to be weird about it. And my other point of advice is that maybe source mates aren't for you. I know, well, not, no, let me not put it that way. Sorry, autism got me. Um, maybe I'm familiar with the Homestuck fandom and the people that tend to have Homestuck fictives. We ourselves have one, and they can be very. They believe characters fit into very specific archetypes and have to act a very specific way. It is a difficult culture to be canon divergent in. So it may be easier to find people that are like-minded to you and then find source mates within those rather than starting with source mates. Um, let's see. Delta's question, I did answer, or at least I tried to answer. I don't know how much got through. But effectively, my answer was I don't know. Let's see. Dakota asks, how did an OC fictive get to know themselves better? Would they need to create more source material themselves? Realistically, yes, I think. That is how a lot of our OC fictives have gotten to know themselves, interacting with other people who know them and their source, and just developing more of it. It's a process, but well worth it. Alright, at this point, we're in the last couple of minutes, so I think we're going to go ahead and begin to wrap up. Thank you all for attending the panel. I hope you all enjoyed. I hope it was useful to some. Hope it was enjoyable. I hope I was helpful in the Q&A. I'm not very good with questions on the spot. If you feel like my answer was not complete enough to your question, if you want more detail, if you have another question for me, please do not hesitate to PM me. I'm always happy to talk, and this extends to beyond OtherCon as well. Always feel free to reach out. So, thank you all. You all were lovely, and I will be reviewing the chat afterwards to see what your commentary was, because I wasn't able to keep much of an eye on it. I had to read my script. Oh shit, my script! I have it. I meant to send at the beginning. Damn it. Oh, oh well. I am. I'm very smart. I promise.